because it is a struggle that we've been onto for a good number of years. And at every point in time, it proved tough to even get the people around us to align to what has been guaranteed by the Constitution. I need to point out clearly that in real terms, nothing new happened yesterday except the will to translate it into an order. Everything.
There is a whole back, excuse me, sir. There is a whole back of noise. I don't know where it is coming from. Mr. Moneke, do you have your audio on?
Certainly not in this my quiet location.
Continue, please.
Hello.
Continue.
Okay,
continue.
It's better now. The only new thing that happened yesterday is the translation of what the Constitution has already guaranteed into a clear order. Because before yesterday, there were already about 8 judgments of the Supreme Court that brought by individuals or organizations that clearly stated that the governors have no right to dissolve local government executive. They had no right to appoint caretaker committees, but they were not being obeyed. The one that is new is a remission of finances at the level of the Supreme Court, because the Buhari government made a decision to remit funds directly, and it became a source of conflict from the same governors. But this is the first time we're getting a clear Supreme Court judgment. And now what it means to us is that democracy is about to be complete. We fought for democracy, but it stopped at a certain level. Those who are supposed to be the beneficiaries of democracy now turned out to be the ones stopping others from enjoying democracy. And because every politics is local, I like to give an example with my own state. Each time there is a governorship election, you find people from all sorts of fields, newcomers to public office.
Sorry, Mr. Madukaife, please. We can't see your face properly. Just move backwards a bit. Better now. Continue.
Is it better?
Much better. Continue.
Okay. All right. So each time you have all sorts of people who are untested. But what we forget is that if you have a governor, the office of a governor, it's a high office. Now, those who are now that all that is going to change, because any government or governor that insists on sustaining illegality will do so at their own cost. What we expect is that people will aspire for lower positions, government will be closer to the people, development will be faster, and unbeknownst to us, there will now be a full federation at work, because those who are quick to point finger that economy is bad, point at the federal government, or in some cases they point at the state government, are not doing it right. The local government is the engine room of development. The local government, most of the time, is in charge of agri extension. That's where we need to pay a lot of attention. So I felt very happy. It was the climax of a struggle, and it was well received, because we had gone to court to get a judgment that the election should be conducted in Anambra State, but it was not conducted. So we're very happy. And I'm sure that most people who have understood the judgment are equally very happy.
All right, let me ask you one more question before we turn to our another guest that just joined us now. I'm talking to you, Mr. Madukaife. Now, yes, the Nigerian Constitution recognizes 3 tiers of government: the federal government, the state government, and the local government.
Yeah.
But the same constitution acknowledges only two legislative parts, the exclusive and the concurrent lists. So some experts will say that even though the local governments are now financially independent, some laws on the state legislature will still affect the administration of local governments. What's your take on that?
I don't think there's any conflict there, and I don't think there's a problem either. It is incorrect to say that the Constitution recognizes two, or did you say 3 tiers of? Yes, the Constitution recognizes government. 3 tiers of government.
Yeah.
Fine. But on the list that you talked about, it also recognizes three levels of legislation. The only thing is that having donated the powers to set up the local government administration, the system of enthronement, the mode of elections, and how the government should be formed to the state government, which is the correct thing to do in a federation. It will not go above it to begin to talk about the third one, which is the residual list. So, it naturally develops itself where it exists. For instance, Lagos State has been conducting local government elections since 1999. And gradually they have developed their own residual list, which is where the local government pays attention. And that happens at the level of the state. So what we have is a balanced federation that we are tending towards, for those who understand it. But for those who are amassing more powers than they really deserve, they may not immediately understand it, but the generations ahead would. So yes, the delineation of functions as far as local government is concerned happens at the state level. It is not something that Abuja will begin to say this local government should legislate on this. It is the states themselves.
Once more, can you hear me? Unmute. Unmute your audio. I can't hear you. Unmute your audio.
Yes, you muted me.
Now, in concrete terms, tell me what will be the expectations of the people at the grassroots? What will now they expect from the local government councils and chairmen? Specific things, projects will they expect in their local community in terms of projects?
Thank you very much.
Just briefly.
There are a few steps to take before you get to that. Can you hear me?
Of course, very clearly.
Okay, very well. So there are a few steps to take before we get to expectation. I want to identify with the analysis given by Chief Ifeanyi Okonkwo on one note, and seize this moment to publicly acknowledge his struggle. We consider him a partner, in the sense that APC has been at the center of this struggle for a very long time. Like I said, we started our own active struggle in roughly 2013 when we boycotted the elections because it was being conducted with an imperfect register. And thereafter, when that tenure finished, they refused to conduct another election. So we went to court. And on May 18, 2018, a judgment came that they should conduct local government election. They ignored it. And so on and so forth. So without boring with too much details, we consider Chief Okonkwo our partner. And he has said something very significant I don't want you to overlook. That is, we are dealing with laid-back people. Each time you are making this effort, it's like, let them keep doing it, as if there's a messiah somewhere in the horizon. Or not understanding clearly that it is the people's power that makes the difference. While you are saying that it is wrong to appoint a caretaker committee and insisting publicly that you won't recognize them at occasions as a local government chairman, people are busy scoring after them for one favor or the other. So now, coming directly to your question, which is expectations, the government is not yet there. The Supreme Court has said this is what should be done. Now, what that means is we don't want caretaker committee. They have outlawed it. Now, the people now need an activism in them. And it will happen in different modes for different states. Because even though it is one central constitutional pronouncement, there are different details for each state. And don't forget, the laws came from different state assembly, and there are different clauses to explore. Until 2008, we never knew in Anambra State anything called caretaker committee. Until clause 208 was smuggled because it is one of those passive legislations that you just make, pass it in one day and put it in a closet, and nobody knows about it until you are faced with an election. So, using Anambra State, where I reside currently, as an example, the duty is now to go back to this legislation, walking through the Anambra State House of Assembly, to begin to rework those aspects of legislation that have been pronounced illegal. For instance, you can't appoint a caretaker committee. And there are so many other things embedded in local government law. So what the action we expect now is for the people to imbibe the import of this judgment, put pressure on their representative at the state assembly level to reflect those things in the law. Then again, using Anambra State, you need to now face ANSEF, Anambra State's Independent Electoral Commission. You have to reconstitute the council. It has never had a council, but there are staff being paid with taxpayers' money. You need to reconstitute the council. You need to set a date and a timetable for local government elections. Because what the pronouncement from the Supreme Court means is that you don't come to power except through democratically elected government, which is already guaranteed in Section 7A of the Constitution. But the Supreme Court has given power and force to it. So you now set a date for election. It is when those things are done and you have free and fair elections, which have thrown up the people that you have voted and people who are accountable to you, then you begin to get to expectations. So there are the expectation, the duty, the responsibility is now on the people. For every right, there's a responsibility. There is work to do. If they go to sleep, the people will go to sleep. Then at the state level, they can fix an election now for 2030. What happened? Would that be acceptable to the people? It is for them to decide. If they go there now and say, okay, fine, the Supreme Court has paid, we want to obey the Supreme Court. Our election has been fixed for 2030. Will the people accept it? So there's a lot of work to do first before they begin to lay back, to begin to expect from people. Well, the work now is on people. Pile the pressure to give effect to them to have the power to choose their own government at the local government level. Who can account for them? That is the easiest government to account, because when you are working in the local government system, everybody knows your house. That's the easiest, that's the most difficult place to abuse office, because you will live in the same community. So the key has been opened, but no, we've not entered. The people have a lot of duty to do. The media has a duty to enlighten people on what the import of the judgment is. As we are, perhaps only a few of us in the elite corps will understand exactly what it means. Gradually, people will understand. And of course, there are contrary interests. There are people who have just been appointed caretaker, whatever, last 2 months. To them, it is like you are dreaming. So there will be centrifugal action to buy time. So that's just the kind of dynamics we expect. So the expectation is still ahead, but they have work to do.
All right. Mr. Mwiwe raised a lot of questions here. I don't know if anyone wants to handle his questions. Anyone?
No, he was asking me. But I wanted to know whether we'll deal with that direct or wait for other questions. I don't know.
Go on.
Okay. I want to thank Oden Jinji. He raised a very critical question. I use that as an example to show that there are so many ways that people circumvent what ought to be an order of the court. You could wake up tomorrow and hear you don't have caretaker government, or you don't have transition governments anymore, but you have temporary government. You could wake up and hear all sorts of grammar, and you could wake up and hear delay. They give you all sorts of excuses. And so that's why I said it rests on the shoulders of the people. When we talk about activism, you don't have to wait and accumulate anger to the point where you find something like NSAS, and then you begin to destroy property and make mistakes. Or like what is happening in Kenya among the youth, not highly controlled, you make mistakes. You do it installmentally. As far as I can see, and I've illustrated this, if you come to Anambra State, for instance, when the House of Assembly is sitting, the gallery is usually empty. That's not what happened in the First Republic. When the Zeeks of this world, the operas, were in those houses, the gallery is usually full. If you tell your legislator what to do, you go there and make sure he does it. If he's going contrary, he has lost the election, the next election before he starts, because he's going against the mandate of the people. That's the kind of activism we need now. And he also talked about tenure, which is very critical. He talked about tenure. Tenure is covered indirectly to the extent that the 1999 Constitution, as amended, gives the power for the legislation on local government administration to the state houses of assembly. And then the State House of Assembly, Anambra State House of Assembly, has now made Anambra Local Government Law 2000. It is that law that was very seriously amended without due process around 2009, 2008, under Governor Peter Obi, to result in a situation where that they have taken advantage of. So the first thing they will do is to remove that section 208. 208, even though there's a pronouncement in policy, the law has to be amended to remove section 208, which allows you to appoint a caretaker committee. Well, the first time we went to court, the prayer was that that law should be quashed because it's inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution as stated in section 7, which has now been upheld by the Supreme Court. We won that case at the High Court. A lot of things went at the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court, but now the Supreme Court, in its full complement, has outlawed everything. So what I'm trying to say is that the tenure is covered. So as long as the same Constitution that is being upheld by the Supreme Court has given the power to legislate, and that power to legislate has defined the tenure of office. It was 3 years at the onset, including no party election. Halfway through, there was also another amendment that made it 2 years. So we cannot, for purposes of order, we can accept the 2 years. But the last election or local government election that took place in Anambra State was in December 2013. And those who emerged from that election, perfect or imperfect as it was, were sworn in January 2014, meaning that they ought to vacate office by January 2016. By January 2016, they ignored everybody and appointed a caretaker committee. That's when we went to court to say, look, these are candidates submitted, and no other party has submitted candidates. You should declare them elected. And the court stopped short of declaring them elected, but declared that there should be election conducted. That's what they ignored and continue to delay. So the tenure is defined according to the law, which is a subset of the Constitution. That answers his second critical question. The third one is for the people to decide. Usually when an infraction has been committed, there are usually two broad schools of thought. One school will say, no, let's not go back to the past. Let's forgive all that has happened and let us proceed so that there will be no rancor, there will be no punishment, whatever. We'll not go back to the past, we'll go forward. The second school of thought says, no, you must delve back into the past to understand what exactly happened so as to define your future. Between these two broad schools of thought, an active set of people will sit down and decide what they want and table it before their government. But remember, the government that would have the local standard to act on this is the local government itself, whose money has been abused. And to be able to get to that point, you have to have that local government. So it is practical, it is pragmatic to classify this struggle into stages. The first stage is let there be local government. Let there be local government.
All right.
As fast as we can.
Chief Madukaife, your final thought, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. First, I'd like to thank you for asking me to come. And secondly, for having a kind of decorous discussion, which I have learned more myself. Let me just say, arising from the discussion we've had, that I will summarize by saying that it's work to do, and that work is centered around the House of Assembly. The important thing is, at the end of the day, that we should have local governments in place. And whether we have local governments that can look for their money that is lost, quote and unquote, or not, whether those local governments arise from individual context, that's independent candidates, which has not been tested in this Fourth Republic, or they arise from political parties, it will all come from the activism we show at the State House of Assembly, which I must confess, on a sad note, is currently under the control of governors instead of checking them. So these are areas where we see more work. And finally, let me touch an area that has not come up in this discussion at all, but I know that as we go forward, it will come up. Some people have said that the State Independent Electoral Commission will stay off and INEC will conduct the election. That's not in the spirit of federalism. And we cannot be approbating and reprobating. INEC itself is not perfect. All we need to do is to get our constitutional organs as it relates to the State Independent Electoral Commission, put the necessary checks on them, again, through the legislation at the state assemblies, and make sure that the elections are clean and clear. The central logistics that INEC has to deal with raises the cost of our elections. So there is nothing that is wrong in principle with having State Independent Electoral Commission. It is just the operation. On that note, I want to say thank you very much, and let's keep this discussion serial and going as part of the activity.